Wednesday, April 22nd. If you missed it last year, it was a real blast. Jason, our marketing director, who's in the room today, is putting this together. And what we're going to do is focus on both holidays. We have Ethan Lee, who's a real tree hugger. He's from the city of Janesville. He's their operations director now. Certified arborist and knows a lot about trees. He's going to talk about trees. I'm going to talk about the garden. We have Dennis from the Ice Age Trail Alliance in the back with the new haircut. Nice, looking good. Dennis has been very involved with our trails. And if you've not been out west of the Healing Garden, we have a half mile of trails through the woodland there. And Dennis and his volunteers and many folks have been improving the trails, including adding steps, railings, a lot of neat stuff happening out there. But do come to this. I think we have food, right, Jason? If that's enticement enough. But it's only going to be as long as you want to stay, but we'll have a couple short programs, and then if the weather's conducive, we'll do garden tours and a tour through the woodland. So feel free, again, to grab these and put them on your fridge and spread the word. This is important to us. If you don't know, this is the 5th year we've been, I guess, certified 4 years now, but through the Arbor Day Foundation, they have a program called Tree Care, Tree Healthcare Campus. And it's for hospitals specifically. And you have to jump through a lot of hoops, including have an inventory of the trees on site, a care plan, and we have that, a management plan. We have a committee involved with monitoring this sort of stuff, but it also includes planting a certain number of trees and doing educational outreach in the community, which this is part of it. We also do projects with the Boy Scouts, and we've had Eagle Scout projects, and anyway, this healthcare tree campus thing is kind of a neat thing, and it's a real fun thing that we've done for a couple years. There's only, I think, 4 hospitals in Wisconsin that are certified, and it's a relatively new program, but I think it's less than 60 nationwide. So we have to reapply every year to get that designation. So we have to prove that we're hugging trees in a nutshell is what's happening, and we are.
So who is it through?
It's through the Arbor Day Foundation.
Okay.
Yeah, National Arbor Day Foundation. Yeah. So, and we get a lot of donated trees, which is great, and the Rock County Conservation District, we're going to get another couple hundred oak trees. We actually hope to have a little tree for everyone on this date. We'll have to see how the timing goes, but we'll see how it pans out. So the topic at hand, by the way, the resumption of our lecture series will probably happen in October, but it's going to get busy for all of us out in the garden once things melt and we start to see the first batch of weeds, which already has been coming up. It started last week on that 70-degree day. There's plenty to deal with. We're excited because we've, on a personal note here for the Healing Garden, we've hired Rochelle's replacement. So we have a young lady starting on Monday who will be helping out in the garden. We have our 2 summer helpers secured, and we need tons of volunteers, many of whom are in the room, but if you have any interest in helping, and that can be episodic, like, hey, I can plant on June 12th, we'll keep you busy. But the little email newsletter I send to many of you currently will include a lot of the dates where we're trying to gather more people to do larger planting, but it's updates on what's happening. There is a clipboard towards the front here if you're interested in putting your name and email, and I'm going to send one out later this week, and it's just to keep everyone in the loop on what's happening up top, as I say, out in the garden. A lot of exciting things. I'll talk about that at the end, but we've got a lot to cover in this hour. So the idea of maximizing sensory engagement, there's not really a better example than what we're doing up in the garden in terms of not only visual beauty, but offering the engagement with fragrance, tactile plants, etc. And we'll talk about the 5 senses as we go through, and we do all of this in our home gardens, although what we're doing in the Healing Garden is a little more pointed or direct in terms of accumulating more fragrant plants, and many of you have seen the raised beds where we're bringing scented geraniums and chocolate cosmos and other things up to waist height for all visitors to enjoy. So it's very heavily planted. We're in the process of applying for a grant through the American Horticultural Society. I think we have a really good chance of getting it, but it's to continue to augment our sensory garden. So it's exciting time. Some of you know my past at Rotary Gardens. There's quite a few of those images interspersed through here, but I think few would argue that this doesn't have inherent beauty, and there's obviously a color scheme here with the reds and maroons, just one of our many planting beds, but the intention here, of course, is color and texture. The nice thing about the Healing Garden is its design was meant to be enjoyed immersively. And if you've been on the all accessible paths and meandered through, it's a very small garden. But the intention is all accessibility, but also beauty for folks that can't get out there. And that's those in the recovery rooms, maybe those that are in the therapy department doing something. You know, that's a huge bank of glass windows there for the therapy department to look out. And that's, by the way, one of our focuses this year is that view, to really augment that. But we will talk about color in the garden as it relates to beauty, but think about the absence of sight or compromised sight where the challenge is you rely on different senses. You may be more prone to appreciate the tactile nature of the garden or fragrance. Something we also do in the healing garden is we're heavy in very saturated colors for those with vision impairments. So that's why you see so many oranges and yellows and reds. They really pop, and we're starved for them. I love this quote by Hannah Ryan: "The greatest gift of the garden is the restoration of the five senses." And that's not just a public garden or the healing garden, it's our own gardens. The idea that getting out there, and we get distracted with needing to pull weeds and watering and all the nuances of actively gardening, but we do need to recharge and enjoy what we're doing. This is not a shocker to anyone that sensory gardens do have proven statistical value. They contribute to our emotional and physical well-being. Great examples would be the layout of the garden up top. Was intentionally designed where the inner loop around the pond. If you've not been up there, you just have to go up and see what I'm talking about. Not today, but wait for it to melt down. But the path around the pond was laid out for 10 laps to a mile. The outer lap is 6 laps to the mile. So you think about someone who just had some sort of surgery and they say, why don't you get a mile in? Or we have some nursing groups that come out and walk a certain number of laps. So I'm not convinced everyone knows the whole distance thing, but you think about the value of just the fresh air, but the mental recharge. And that's why when people tend to assume a healing garden is just for patients, I see as many staff up there as I do patients, and I think that's great. And what a great amenity. Also a selling feature for recruitment, by the way, to say anyone who's being employed here, we got a pretty nice garden. Whether you use it or not, it's up there. And I'm still trying to get more people to get out there. This is at a children's garden where they're talking about the five senses, and what a great age to get kids involved. You'll notice both in that rustic image and this one from the New York Botanic Garden, when I took these images, they're in public settings, and so taste is not represented in public gardens because of our litigious society and the liability of allergies and that sort of thing. And when I was at Rotary Gardens, we grew edibles, but we were careful not to just have general browsing by visitors, because inevitably you never know what's going to happen. And by the way, in some healthcare garden settings, the challenge with memory concerns is some folks that may be prone to consumption, the fact that grabbing and just eating. So you want to be careful of those concerns. But back to the idea of touch and sight and hearing and smell, those are all slam dunks. Clem Arboretum in Rockford. Some gardens, it's not just a fragrant garden or a beautiful garden offering visual interest or sound or whatever it happens to be. Our gardens are offering multiple senses of interest. And what I like about this, there's the sound of water, there's beauty, there's just a lot going on. So we're absorbing all of these things. And some settings just simply don't have that. And that's no criticism of this neighborhood, but imagine if this were a pocket park or something. The idea of greenery. I grew up in the Chicago area, and my dad worked for the Forest Service for 40 years, and he did urban research and found that they would get kids out into the forest preserves in Cook County, and many of the kids, they would freak out being in the woods because they'd never been in that sort of setting. It was foreign to them. So the idea of immersive greenery is important. And my little one, Luciana, who's now 26, I love this image. She was always many steps ahead of me, this little prairie restoration. So out in Portland, Oregon, I've shown this image in previous talks. They do a wonderful job with healing gardens, and it's the Legacy Health System. But look at this walled garden. There's little areas of shade. There's some water features. This little circle of turf up top, that's for exercise and yoga, etc. It's also meant for memory care, so the fact that it's walled and excludes people being able to disappear, to wander off. And it's also privacy and protection as well. And that's just one of their many gardens. They do an amazing job. But a sensory garden isn't a type of garden. It happens in all our gardens to a certain degree. So I know at Rotary, the installation of what is termed the wellness garden back in 2018, there was a lot of confusion as to what it is. How is this going to promote wellness? Isn't the whole 20 acres promoting wellness? And the short answer is yes. But it was a very concerted effort to include all accessibility, those with mobility impairments. If you visited, you've seen raised beds similar to what we have up top. But there are features that can be emphasized as the important thing. But in terms of landscape design, we want function, we want spaces we can use, we want accessibility, and we want beauty, of course. So that goes hand in hand. In Janesville, the school for the blind and visually impaired would bring students out often, and so their visit was different, not in the enjoyment of a garden per se, but not having the visual component. And here, a tactile interaction with a pine tree that we tiered. That's a Japanese white pine, incidentally, but ultimately it was amazing to us the sensory engagement that these students had. And we did a lot of fragrant plants there as well, and I think that's important. So color goes beyond the wheel. If I was giving a design talk, I don't subscribe to this. And many of you know that just simply based on my fashion choices. I've never found colors that just don't work. But there's logical ones. But it's important to mention when you go to your local garden centers, which we should all patronize, of course, when you go to your local garden centers, you're starved right now for those bright colors. You'll see the yellow marigolds and the red salvias, and you'll see things forced into bloom, ready to be purchased, and there's nothing wrong with that. But remember, those warm colors are as important as they are for beauty. Don't neglect the cooler colors of blues, maroons, greens. I've never gone in a garden where I've said, that's way too much blue. It simply doesn't happen. And I like using a lot of white and silver as well. If you came to the garden last year, we had a lot of silver. We had a red, white, and blue theme, and that silver is what really unified it. Always consider texture. So we're talking a little bit about the visual component in the garden. Consider all inputs, and I won't, for the sake of time, go into the details of all of this, but what you're seeing is galvanized steel culvert pipe at Rotary Gardens, painted, jammed in the ground. There were containers of garbage cans of soil. That's parsley up top, by the way. This was part of the Story Walk program. They continue to do this, by the way, but this interpreted Planting the Rainbow, which by Lois Ellert, and it's about nutrition in the garden. So there was a lot of edibles and color, but my comment about inputs is our garden isn't just about the plants, it's the color of the fence, it's all the things we're including. It's the decks, patios, retaining walls, so the landscape is a lot of different things. And what we liked about this was the strong verticality and kind of whimsy provided by literally just repurposed culvert pipe. And of course, doing it at a big scale on the primary slope there at the gardens. That was one of the years we did a Gothic theme. And no doubt about it, this is nobody's backyard. No one wants to do this much work. But the intention here was, this is the primary parking lot, so it was the impression of this. And notice the repetition of culvert pipe and some other fun things, but you get a visceral feel for coloration. The year it was yellow and blue always works. Pastel theme, this was our moonlit garden. These obelisks, incidentally, are 10 feet tall. They were built to accommodate the slope. And there's non-living color. I mean, without those, it's still interesting, but it's offering scale, verticality, and interest. And orange in a big way, and I always joke about the orange because it offended many people who never liked orange and won't like orange, but it definitely was talked about. I love orange in the garden. I can't get enough. But we all know the types of plants we can include in our garden. And actually, before the snow, we were, starting to see snowdrops and some other things starting up, as you might in your own garden. So it's certainly about progression of bloom. You want to see something now all the way till hard frost. So you have your 7 months of your grow season. And it includes all these categories, all offering some degree of ornamentality, function in the landscape. We're always talking about right plant in the right spot. That's all valid. But back to the comment of sensory gardens, when we talk about vision, I lean into a chaotic mix of color just to have a lot of interest. But sometimes we do specific things. And that might be getting into pastels or focusing on a certain type of plant. But again, flowers are more than just color. They have interesting shapes. The timing of the bloom is important. Foliage is very important. And if you look in this image, you see a lot of flower power, but this golden phallopia, that's golden silver lace vine, those blue pyramids in May became totally gold late in the season. So colorful foliage and texture is important. The seasonality aspect, we want something of interest through the seasons. Incidentally, you should be vigilant in observing your garden for lapses of interest, which have to be addressed in another season, meaning you're going to walk around your spring garden and go, boy, I wish I had some bulbs here. It would have been nice to have some spring color. You're going to address that in fall. Your summer garden, you may see lapses, and then you run to the garden center and start infilling. But again, our landscapes are fluid pieces of art. They're constantly evolving and changing, so we have to roll with it. And back to non-living color, another story walk, which was where the wild things are, where that young boy's room becomes this jungle. So some of you, there's Rotary Gardens volunteers in here. This was the year we had these doors, and we knew this was a successful. There were like 7 berms of tropicals, and slamming doors all summer long as the kids were running through. So we knew it was of interest. Like, who wouldn't want to run down that? So that's engagement.
Kids still lost.
Yeah, there was an elephant ear. Knowing your plant's important, knowing the fact that this is only 2 weeks of this threadleaf blue star, so beautiful in early May, but you should also know, and we have some great ones of these up in the garden, that as it starts to turn chartreuse in the season, it eventually goes to this yellow. And so I'm just using this as a simple example of saying, if you're dedicating real estate to an ornamental plant, try to get multiple features of interest. In this case, a late season color, which is nice. There's some of these right outside the med-surg wing looking out, so these look great late in the season. This woody plant, Heptacodium, so you're seeing a millisecond in the life of this, which happens to be in September here when it's blooming. So this smaller scaled woody plant, very fragrant white flowers, not native in any way, but attracts tons of pollinators, including a lot of monarchs. And then, so it's called 7 sunflower, which is interesting. The flowers are in clusters of 7. It's an ancient plant, interesting bark. I wax poetic about all these plants, but what's neat is as it's finishing blooming in late September, the calyces, the structures that hold the flower petals, all the petals are dropping, then the calyces do this. The flowers are done, but this red carries on. So that's in October. There's some huge ones up at Old Brick Botanical Gardens in Madison. So they're almost 20 feet tall. So, I mean, you look at that and say, look at those pink flowers while you're seeing post-flowering. But there's some of the interesting bark. So this isn't a featurette on specific plants. It's saying you want to know what your plants need from you in terms of light and soil, but know what they're going to give you and when. And that kind of fits into how you lay them out for combinations. You know, in the shade, we become more reliant on foliage. All of these plants bloom, but in the shade, we're more reliant on textures and colors. We all know hostas, golden sedge, there's some other fun stuff in here, but that tapestry to me is as interesting as any flower bed. And those non-living elements, the Rotary Garden, you know, we did a lot with obelisks over the years. These getting different colors to do things like this. If you ever go to the Holiday Light Show, all of these are out with lights on them. They're still taking that sucker down. I don't miss that, I'll tell you. It's a lot of work. But there's the planting, where the wild things are, with the windows and doors and all sorts of fun stuff. Even Adirondack chairs. And the comment here is these are beautiful contributors in the landscape. On a tangent, the sad commentaries, we did have to anchor everything down. Concerns of theft and such. We saw a lot of these appear. Ear house, Deb. It was weird. All nicely. No offense, I'm not casting any blame. Look at the children's garden with, that's repurposed PVC pipe, the orange and the blue with plastic bowls, also jammed in the ground. These are fun, by the way, and this is not so much related to the sensory garden, but Stoughton Trailer, they have billions of these, and what's for shipping sheet metal. So we grabbed a bunch and painted them up and made them into planters. But this was the year it was a pollinator theme for the kids, so we elevated a lot of the flowers. So the flowers are doing their thing, but look at the non-living color. Again, you know, culvert pipe. And that was fun. The grass, incidentally, is called blue lime grass. That's up in those pipes. You would never want to plant that in your garden. It's rampant, a rampant spreader. It might be banned in Wisconsin now, as it probably should be. But that was a narrow bed that screamed for scale, needed verticality, so the repetition, equidistant, same distance between them, and painted up. So fragrance in the garden, that's one of my my favorite topics, and scent is subjective. I'm not here to say you should all like lilacs. I mean, I love lilacs. Go up to Madison, go to UW Arboretum, Longnecker Gardens, that's their big woody collection, one of the largest lilac collections in the country, and catch it. I mean, I love it. But that's flash in the pan, that's 2 to 3 weeks tops. So a progression of scent's important. Intensity can differ during the timing of day. Something many of you won't know, we advertise the healing garden as dawn till dusk, by the way. But patients and staff have access later in the evening. We have night lighting, so we don't encourage the general populace to come out at that point. But we specifically plant night bloomers, those that offer fragrance in the evening, moonflowers, night phlox, to offer that fragrance for that certain timing. But wind speed, humidity, temperature, it all affects things. Scent is typically over dramatized, so many catalogs and descriptions will say fragrant. And the year we did a fragrant garden, many years at Rotary, I found many things that I didn't feel had enough fragrance. But fragrance is either emitted, like a lilac, you're wafting on the air, or it's tactilely induced. So the raised buds up top frequently have almost 40 scented geraniums, so you have to rub and get peppermint, rose, pine, etc. And we know that with many of our herbs. So remember the timing with fragrant flowers? That's sweet sultan, upper right, and lower portion is something called mountain mint, which has a kind of a menthol smell to it when you rub it. I'm gonna retract that, because I've never actually run into conflicting scent, like gone, oh, there's vanilla, and oh, that lemon, you know. It just really doesn't happen. I will say one of the challenges with a lot of things to rub and smell is you start to get a combination of things. So bring the little wet wipes and freshen up and do your thing, because it's the oils and the leaves that really get it going. You know, lavender, well grown. I've never grown lavender this well. Up in Washington Island, there's some really nice lavender farms. Fragrant roses, and we know there's all sorts of fragrant plants, but again, it's a timing thing. We're headed into the early spring here with lilacs, fragrant viburnums, abelias. We'll segue into summer with roses and other neat things. We have a lot of that up top to offer that, but we also do a lot of annuals and perennials. And at Rotary, we did this smelly garden for 3 years, and it was a real blast. And like the yellow is popcorn plant, which we've had up in the healing garden, and that one smells like buttered popcorn when you rub the buds. The best way to get a child interested in gardening is fragrant plants, and also having them grow some of their own vegetables really is a huge connection. But we had all sorts of kind of rub and smell me samples here in containers, scented geraniums, etc. We had a scavenger hunt with scented things. These kids flipped out when we said, you're going to go out there and find the fragrance of vanilla, chocolate, pine. Rose and lemon are pretty easy. There's a lot of plants that offer that, but just some crazy smells. And they had a lot of fun doing it. So maximizing scent, you know, spring blooming plants. A couple years ago, we did 8,000 of these garden hyacinths out in the garden. Unbelievable. Consider perennials, those herbaceous plants that come back every year, like garden phlox and many of the lilies. Our plant considerations up top are tempered by deer browsing. The deer are prolific, so we do have to keep that in mind. Summer annuals, there's summer bulbs. I'll show some examples here, but consider containers. You know, even if you just have an apartment balcony, can you include scented plants in containers? Of course you can. And by the way, scent with plants was never evolved for human enjoyment. The emission of fragrance is to attract pollinators, and as a general comment, but with the oils and the various foliage, think of herbs and scented geraniums, that's meant to deter insect damage. So the fact that we enjoy it or use it for cooking or whatever is really incidental, but the evening scent thing I think is really cool. And many of these plants are actually not opening until evening, emitting this perfume to attract pollinators, many of which are moths. But you know, lilacs, fragrant viburnums, a close-up fist-sized cluster of flowers. So Korean spice viburnum blooms for 2 to 3 weeks in May. Also gets a good fall color, which is nice. Mock orange. This happens to be a variegated mock orange, so it has the benefit of a white variegated foliage. But you know, mock orange, nothing better than mock orange in bloom for fragrance. And then then it's not overly exciting visually. It's a big green blob. That's why I like the variegated form for ornamentality. Close-up of Abelia mosinensis, extremely fragrant. One plant in this room, you'd be able to smell it through both these rooms. And it's an arcing shrub, and I only mention that because knowing your plant's important. It's one thing to say, I want the fragrance from this shrub in my backyard. The other thing is to know that it gets 6 to 7 feet and cascades out 8 feet. It's this humping irregular mound that you can't shear into a meatball. So you have to accommodate the form and its needs, but it also gets a great fall color. So that goes back to knowing the attributes of the plants. And I show this Katsura tree because this is something I stumbled on 20 years ago. I was actually running cords for the light show. This is like October of many years ago. I kept smelling like cotton candy. And it was very sweet. And I'm like, what is going on? And I tracked it down, later confirmed with research that when Katsura tree is at the peak of golden fall color, just as the leaves are starting to drop, it emits great distance, the smell of like burnt caramel, cotton candy, extremely sweet. Now this can be a huge tree, so do you plant a Katsura tree in your backyard for that like 3 days of cotton candy smell? Well, that's up to you, but I thought it was a real neat feature. Seasonality, like here's a shot in late April at the Chicago Botanic Garden. So you're not planting your petunias yet, but these garden stocks, these fragrant stocks are quite cold tolerant. A couple years ago we did oodles of these up in the raised beds, and they actually bloomed through the whole year, which was amazing. But these containers will become something else in the heat of summer. But the benefit here is this is a wafting sweet fragrance from the purple. The garden hyacinths, again, I've alluded to, there's one of the raised beds. Unfortunately, due to some of our heavier soils, a lot of these have not perennialized. They really need a dry summer dormancy, which they don't get with all our watering and such. Garland, spirea in the back. So we're still about 6 weeks away from this. There's that popcorn cassia. Knowing your plant's important because as much as you want the kids to engage with this, you don't want them to eat it or have your dogs eat it because it is poisonous. So you have to be careful with that. But look at it in the midst of a combination here for pollinators. You guys, you'll recognize, I think I showed this at your Jefferson presentation. So one of the summer gardening programs over in Jefferson, here's how you get gardeners. And Rotary used to contribute popcorn plants to any summer gardening program. Fragrant heliotrope, smelling like vanilla. By the way, with heliotrope, there's a lot of blue forms, but not all of them are fragrant. So if you know heliotrope, also poisonous, but has a great wafting smell. The chocolate cosmos, we have it every year up in the raised beds, and it smells like dark chocolate, but you have to be really close to it, like literally getting it up to your nostrils, but it really has a dark chocolate smell. And it's quite beautiful. Chocolate daisy, this is a native California wildflower, but also smells like chocolate. And these are just little minuscule examples. These are annual phlox that have a nice fragrance. Look at the beauty. They're very small flowers. You don't get scale in this image, but they're quite small. We've done a lot of flowering tobacco here. This is the old-fashioned woodland tobacco, so that emission primarily at dusk into the evening. The challenge with flowering tobacco is their receding nature. They tend to recede quite a bit. But for us, the deer leave them alone for the most part, which is nice. And not all are fragrant, but many are. And here's, this is evening phlox, evening stocks. It's on your slide list. I'm drawing a blank here. But during the day, what is it called? Night phlox?
Fragrant night phlox.
Night phlox, thank you. So during the day, it's this maroon fist. That's the backside of the petal. And so at night, it opens up. And they're teeny little flowers. And so I caught it in the morning before they closed back up. So they emit an unbelievable fragrance, but they're not overly showy. This is something you put in a window box or on the back deck. And I've grown it at home. The Latin's a mouthful. It's on your slide list. Zaleuzianskaya, but it's in all your seed catalogs. But again, it only opens at night. Peacock orchids, this is a summer bulb. You'd start early, very fragrant. I'm sorry for the speed, but we do have a lot to cover. Fragrant tuberoses, we did these in the raised beds in the Healing Garden last year. And here's a double form, the pearl. They bloom at 3 to 4 feet. So what you get, let's say you go to the garden center, there's a fist-sized bulb. The challenge with them is if you were to take that bulb and plant it in late May or June, it doesn't have enough time to bloom for you. So you have to start it early is what I'm getting at. So you start it like now or in April. So when you plant it out, it's already gained some height and it'll tend to bloom in later summer. So we did this for what we had up in the garden up top. At Rotary Gardens, one of the tips with something like this or the peacock orchids you saw earlier, these summer bulbs, is we would get them in mass. So let's say we got 1,000 of these. We would never start all 1,000 at the same time because they mature and bloom all at the same time. We would stagger their start times. And what that would do out in the garden is stagger their peak blooming time. So there'd be fragrant tuberose peaking here, and then it would peak here and peak over there. So that's just a little tip if you want to stagger the bloom times, but unbelievably fragrant. I think we brought one of these into as a in one of the cut displays up at the front desk, and it was overpowering. It's inside, it's overpowering. It's unbelievable. And of course our herbs, you know, something like dill. I love dill in the garden as an ornamental, but our herbs can offer so much as well. Container potential, easy to grow. Think about just the general comment of fresh eating, walking. It's insane that in summer that we are buying dried basil at the grocery store. You should be able to go out and get at least fresh sweet basil. One of the many scented geraniums, very strong peppermint scent when rubbed, like literally chewing gum. Garden salvia, this is actually hardy as a perennial for us, but look at the silver foliage, so nice. This was a big part of the moonlit garden theme we've done in the past, but ultimately whether you're using it for culinary use or not is really up to you. And there's a variegated form with a trailing oregano. So back to the sensory garden, one of the easiest things you can do to engage the senses is, when I go out and water my backyard, I'm always just pinching a little bit of this or that just for fun. And that's how you get the kids involved. So bronze fennel is all the yellow and the haziness in the back. That's a celosia on the right. Fennel having that sort of licorice-like smell. One of my favorite herbs for engaging kids is lemon verbena. There's a lot of herbs that have a pledge like lemon, kind of more of a chemical type. This is like pure lemon. It has a lot of culinary uses. We always have it in the raised beds. Obviously not hardy, but it's an amazing plant. And when I take tours through there, I'm telling people, yes, pick off an entire leaf, rub it, and smell it. And it's pure lemon.
Good for tea, too.
Good for tea, yeah. Yep. Lemongrass. We've always done lemongrass in the raised beds, and our chef Josh in the cafe comes up, and I've never used lemongrass. I'm not much of a cook, but I didn't realize what he was doing was taking the lowest portion of the stem. It wasn't the upper grass. He was cutting it and using for stir fries some of the lowest portion, but it really has a real lemony smell. You know, fragrant peonies. And by the way, not all peonies are fragrant, not all lilies are fragrant. So again, a little more research in knowing what has maximum fragrance. Some of the wonderful perennial phlox. This is a royal lily. So as with many lilies, you don't want to get that pollen on you. It'll never come out of your clothing. But the year we did the 3 years we did the smelly garden at Rotary, we planted like 500 of these, and the fragrance was unbelievable, just unreal. The challenge we have in the healing garden is the deer really enjoy the lilies. So we have some repellents we're using. I actually don't get too frustrated about it anymore. It just happens. So these are interesting. Satisfaction are one of many what are termed Orient pet lilies. They're a hybrid between an oriental lily. And by the way, there's countless classifications of lilies, but like for instance, Asiatic lilies are not fragrant. But oriental lilies, here combined with trumpet lily, so what you're getting is a quite tall, 4-foot tall lily blooming in, this is late July. The English cottage garden at Rotary, these are probably still there. We just did 50 of them, just poked them in. And when they were at peak flower, it was unbelievable. The fragrance was unreal. So, you know, lilies, I think, are one of the go-tos. And lilies have insect and disease issues. There's all sorts of things happening, but they're still worth their salt. And Gonzano is one of just many of the, this is another Orient pet lily. That's amazing. And back to color preferences, pure white is dynamite in the garden. So by the way, you're not supposed to plant this anymore because it's reseeding everywhere. This is autumn clematis. And so at Chicago Botanic Garden, it's coming over this balustrade, but autumn clematis is amazingly fragrant when it's blooming in September to October. But it's reseeding, starting to reseed everywhere. So you won't find it at your garden centers, but there are some alternatives. There it is at Rotary Gardens, going over that Druid sculpture. That was just unbelievably fragrant. Moonflower, they only last a day like any morning glory. And this is when I would come in or be leaving. These were right out on the moon gates up in the healing garden. This is when it's coiled and ready to spring open. And if I caught them in the morning, this is a photo from last year, I think, up top. These were just finishing out. And the bloom size is like 6 to 8 inches. So they're not hard to grow from seed. And just as a tip, they don't like to be pampered. And they weren't where we planted them. They were in pretty lean soils. Because if it's too rich, they get too much stem and foliage growth at the expense of flowering. So anyway, leaner soils for moonflowers. So sound in the garden. Well, I'll start by saying, we think about how do I bring sound in the garden? Well, that's a consideration because there are plants that make sound. There's non-living elements that make sound. I always joke about my neighbors have had these persistently durable wind chimes for like a decade. And they've lost little pieces, so the horrendous little tinkle of sound is now just even worse. And so there's a non-living sound brought into our garden. Sound in the garden is sometimes the exclusion of sound. Hedges or screening the air conditioner or adding water to muffle the sound. And part of the intention up top in the double waterfall in that ever-flowing urn is we get enough highway traffic. We can hear I-90. We also can hear 59 here. It just about muffles it, just that sound of water. And so anyway, I'll show you some examples, but you won't go to a garden center and say, well, where's your section for plants with sound? It just doesn't exist. Plants that contribute sound, that's wind-induced, and it's always kind of a secondary thing, like, oh, standing under these mature white pines with a breeze is kind of cool. They're really making a neat sound. So again, it's not a category you necessarily run into, but again, you might be screening external noises, like your neighbor's wind chimes and things like that, or that air conditioner that's making noise. By the way, try to shade your air conditioners. They run more efficiently with some shade, becomes important. But auditory elements can certainly be plants. I'll show you some examples. It's a little hard to see, but this is a water feature, and the water's recirculating and just trickling out. Sound can be water features, wind chimes, non-living elements. In larger gardens, sometimes it's an auditory clue. And even some of your Rotary Gardens folks maybe don't realize this, but as you're coming through the formal gardens to the Japanese garden, you start to hear the huge waterfall. It's a triple waterfall. And that entire water system, prior to my time there, was designed to have a series of sounds and spillways. So as you enter the gates, you're in, there's 26 different garden themes there. So you enter now this Japanese garden, roaring sound of water. And as you meander down the sinuous paths, where every path, little bridge goes over the stream, there's a spillway. So you get an additional sound, an auditory component. And that's an auditory cue. It's telling you you're going through the garden. In situations of lack of sight or vision impairments, auditory cues or clues might lead people through a space as well or help define a different space. I won't write a poem about it, but if you've never had hummingbirds buzz by you, that's kind of cool. We get a ton of hummingbirds up in the garden, and we plant for them specifically. And the young juvenile males are the problem makers, as we all can imagine, with hummingbirds too. They're very competitive, but there's a lot of just zipping, 80 miles an hour zipping by your ear. But the buzz of pollinators. I've described perennials that are literally a buzz, like you can hear all the buzzing. The sound of water. Imagine sitting here on these Adirondack chairs and having that fountain in the distance. A teeny little spillway here. If you didn't think you had to go to the bathroom, you do after you go by this. It's just White River Gardens, Indianapolis Zoo. And by the way, you won't be surprised to hear every kid that saw this would go and then plug one of the frogs so the other ones would shoot farther. And I had to get involved with that. Let's block them all. Let's see what's going to happen. But imagine, as you're seeing these, you can imagine the sound. So Chicago Botanic Garden has these. This is in their Buehler Enabling Garden. This is a sheet flow. And notice its intention is anybody can go and just, whether you're in a wheelchair or you're a 3-year-old kid or you hobble over there, you can put your hand in that. All their water is treated. There's laws and such on how you have to deal with water if it starts to become sort of a swimming situation, which isn't the case here, but you could imagine the sound of that coming out. I think that's rotary. There's the stream. Yeah, you see some different spillways here. Really quite intentioned. But plants with sound, here's a late season shot. All the pink you see is big blue stem. A good year for seasonal color for that. But imagine a prairie. If you've ever gone through a grassland or a prairie with a breeze, unbelievable. Quaking aspen. We have a couple here on the property. They truly quake. If you've ever heard them rattle with a breeze, it's really cool. Knowing your plant's important because these are colonizers. They just keep suckering out, and they'll cover acres. You know, under the white pine, you know, again, cool stuff. Squirrel tail grass or foxtail barley, as this is called. It's not so much sound actually as it's, imagine a breeze coming across this too, the vision of this. This is an annual grass for us here. So northern sea oats, I show this with a little concern. It's a native grass, but the challenge, and you should know this because it's still being sold, but it's it's receding now in our climate. So it's becoming a little problematic. But it gets these oat-like seed heads and it really rattles in the breeze. So if you were to Google up plants with sound, this is always on the list, always. And it's great in arrangements. It has a real neat architecture, but it does have a little sound to it, which is nice. Well, I love baptisias or false indigos in spring. We have a lot of these up in the garden. So their seed pods are a little less showy, but those rattle too, and that's kind of cool. They have a sound to them. But you're not planting the baptisia saying, I don't care about the flowers, I can't wait to hear the seeds rattle. That just happens to be a benefit. So tactile in the garden, of course, I'm happy both my adult daughters were very engaged with the garden, and that included having to touch everything, of course. There's the little one at Olbrich. And I'm sure those grasses were planted to soften the edge of the path, but also who's not going to, go through there and touch those things. Deb, I think you gave me this photo. This might have been yours.
I think that's from Footville.
Yeah.
Elizabeth.
Yep. And I show this simply because here's a case where the master gardeners did outreach and went to a facility and potted up Sansevieras, but I think you know the research now, the microbes in soil, like working with soil makes you feel better, like it's a serotonin boost, it's unbelievable. But you think of folks maybe that have gardened more in their earlier lives, getting your fix as simple as this, the repotting a house plant. So that engagement is important. Yeah, I've used this for years. This was your gig, I'm sure of it.
It was really successful too.
They loved it.
They did, they loved it, and we went back the second
Oops,
time.
let me back up. That was at St. Elizabeth?
Yeah, St. Elizabeth in Footville.
In Footville, yeah.
So many people bring plants to them, and then they sit there in their room and get all root bound and aren't doing really anything. So this was great.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. We've got some plants in the waiting rooms that could use a little help. So texture in the garden. So there's visual texture, yes, bold and fine. But think about texture in terms of these different characteristics. And when those students from the School for the Blind and Visually Impaired came through, we actually tried to customize and tailor a tour that included a lot of different things. And, spiny, bumpy, ridged, and it was just really amazing. And that included fragrant plants as well, of course. Water features are great. They have their own inherent maintenance, so you have to keep that in mind, whether it's waterfalls or little spillways or whatever it happens to be. Lamb's ear. My younger daughter, this was her thing. We still have a patch of lamb's ear we had planted for her 26 years ago. She used to pull leaves off of it and, just rub it. This is in the children's garden at Rotary, and this is placed so people can do exactly that, and that's rub those leaves. Woolly sage. It's on the edge of this raised planter for a reason, and that's because people absolutely have to touch it. Side note, kiss of death is too much overhead irrigation because that felty foliage just starts to rot out. That's the case with a lot of silver plants, by the way. They need really good drainage. And at the Chicago Botanic Garden, same plant, same situation, an edge. And these are different height for wheelchair accessibility. Not just height, it's knee clearance for 3 different heights of wheelchair. So people can roll under and be right there. And that's for adults and children. That Buehler Enabling Garden is top notch, but look at this angel wing senecio. Who's not going to touch that? This was at Longwood Gardens. And this is not my image, but I thought this was neat seeing this kid touch this. Grasses, of course, texture. Visual texture, physical texture, Mexican hair grass. There's that bronze fennel again. Wonderful scent. Horsetail. So I do need to mention, we have a smaller horsetail up in the garden we're struggling to get rid of. This is a dinosaur day plant, so it doesn't truly flower, it reproduces by spores. But what you're seeing, these cool jointed stems, what's interesting is on the tours at Rotary Gardens, there's a huge patch of it, and the pioneers called it scouring rush. It's very rough. It has actually a silica in the tissues, so they would grab a bundle and they could scour pans. The kids called it Tinker Toy plant because you could take the sections and separate them and then kind of put them back together. But it's a horrendous runner, and we left it at Rotary Gardens. I think it's still there. I hope it is, because it, I think, predated everyone, all the human interaction with that site. But 400 million year history, which is really amazing. So that's kind of a fun plant. But when you talk about tactile, who's not going to touch that? And little water features, again, you got to consider pumps and things like that. This was at a healing garden out near Philadelphia. And what you don't know is it's literally entirely surrounded by a building. So all the gardening activity has to come through the facility, which can be challenging. But it's 4 levels, all looking down into this beautiful garden. And this is interesting because this green glass lights up at night, but you have this spillway and this soothing sound of water. And I think that's amazing. And of course, visitors, every kid's going to have to see how close they can get to that. And a lot of wet people have left that site, I'm sure. At the Morton Arboretum, if you've ever seen these granite balls, they float on a heavy jet of water. Like you can literally get them spinning. And the children's garden at the Morton Arboretum is top notch. It's going on maybe 15 years now. Leaning into maybe a glorified playground. That's just my personal opinion, but there's a lot of potential for children's education. And what's neat is these kids were getting this spinning. It's actually an accurate globe. And I had to shove them all out of the way and say, this is how you really get it going. Really get it. Priced one of these for Rotary Gardens, and that's like 75 grand for one of those. Yeah. Yep. Taste in the garden. Remember earlier, I'm wary of taste, just simply because you just never know what people are concerned with. And the comment, we don't all have room for traditional row gardening like this. I think that's great if you do. A lot of times we incorporate edibles into any space we can in the landscape, but these start to get a little off topic. The comment here is just about safety in growing things. This could be its own topic, but there's a lot of great things you can do with edibles, whether that's cool season things like mustard greens. This is a cool season crop before you're putting in your cucumbers and tomatoes and such. So why bother growing edibles? The convenience of stepping outside. And prices, we know prices are going up, and it's amazing to me, the produce aisle. And I'm always critical of it, and I'm preaching to the choir here and on a soapbox. But from my time as a youth till now, frozen pizza, ice cream, soda aisles, energy drinks, all of that, unbelievable. And produce has gotten a little smaller, and it's so darn expensive. So why not grow some of this stuff at home? The variety, and lettuce is a great example. It's not just iceberg lettuce, no criticism. I mean, that's what I grew up on. But try the other 1,200 varieties of lettuces. Easy to grow from seed. I mean, do it. Food safety, how many times do we hear a recall? Oh, I ate that last week. I wish I had known. And a lot of that has to do with how the plants are treated out in the fields and such. You just don't know the inputs. Saving money, of course, and intangibles is really the fun. And that's, at my house, my deck there, we have 3 of these little containers, and we do mixed greens. And so I cut on that 3 times. I'm cutting it 3 times before I remove it and it comes something else. And that's usually Swiss chard or a more heat-tolerant green. So do you know how much the thrice washed organic lettuce is for a container? It's like $6 or $7. $5.99. Yeah. Yeah.
When do you start that?
I usually start the seeding in early April.
Okay.
Yeah.
You do right outside then?
Yep. I sow right outside. Yep.
So in 2 weeks, you'll be out there.
I
That's about
I
right.
almost put my seeds out before this last snowstorm, and I thought maybe it's a little too early.
A little too early. They probably be okay. And lettuces have a little cold tolerance. Like they'll take it down to like 30-ish, but yeah, you got to be wary of a. We know we can still get a hard freeze into mid-May, so we have to be wary. But yeah, early sowing. There's all sorts of opportunities. Think about non-traditional space. Like I have a small deck, but a pretty good sized flagstone patio, and I have like 70 containers, and it's sweet basil, hot peppers, eggplant. So I've increased the space, and what you're seeing here is just a prefab metal stack container. What I like about it is the depth is at least a foot, which is what you need for a lot of vegetables. Like I don't think I'd put a tomato in here, but the eggplants and beans and such will be okay. Variability, go through your seed catalogs, go to your local growers. And by the way, get some extra seeds for the kids. That becomes important. I try to stay away from chemicals. We're not chemical free up in the Healing Garden. I'm not chemical free at home. But my last line of defense is chemicals. It's never a proactive approach. What I mean by that is go to your box stores and see that long aisle of chemicals. And some of the promotion for those chemicals is spray this and you won't have problem X, Y, or Z. Meaning spray this in advance and you won't see that potential problem. And that's insane. That's just applying chemicals willy-nilly. And you think about chemical use in our agricultural lands, there's just a lot of things going on that, if we can modify what we're doing at home, let's do it. And so chemicals for me is the last line of defense. Like I'm just not getting on top of this. So, and that primarily is herbicides. I've had to do some herbicides up top, and we're fighting the cattails in the pond, which is not a manual endeavor. But cost savings, what would this cost at the grocery store? I don't know. I mean, that could be $70. I have no idea. But for the equivalent of like $3 in seeds, that's worth it. I love this quote. Some of you remember Sue Carlson from Rotary. Her granddaughter Lily is now 23. She started bringing Lily when she was 18 months. And she used to stack pots and organize pots and anyway, talk about a great connection. And I know she's a gardener. She's in college now. But why try to explain miracles to your kids when you can just have them plant a garden? I think that makes a lot of sense. There's Lily, I don't know, 10 years ago probably. Yeah, get the kids involved. It's so important. Can't say enough about it. And we have a shared driveway. I go into these personal stories, bear with me. But the house next to us had 4 boys. They've since moved closer to the hospital here, actually. But their parents were always doing other stuff. Teachers, they had summers off and stuff, but we actually created containers for the 4 boys, created containers for the boys along our side of the driveway so the boys could pick what they wanted. And so they're always coming over checking on their cherry tomatoes. And, and that cherry tomato that this kid would pick, and I've already forgotten their names, but that's the best tomato they've ever had in their life. You know what I mean? There's the hook. And so take the time to engage the kids in any fashion. Some of you remember Janice Peterson from Rotary Gardens. This is her mom. I think her mom has since passed, but I show this image simply because and there's affiliation with Jim, Deb, that you'll hear here. But so this young lady in her earlier life did a lot of gardening and now is in a facility where she can't garden beyond the patio. And bad hips, bad knees, getting up and down, forget it. So Jim Hosman, one of our great volunteers and master gardeners, he's since passed away, but I think Jim, maybe the recappers did this with Jim, but they built this elevated planter for her. And talk about getting her fix. And her daughter said her disposition just changed unbelievably. And that's 8 square feet. That's 2 by 4. But waist high, she can belly button height garden. There's a little hook for hanging baskets. And no, she's not going to scramble around and deal with a 1/4 acre or more. But talk about getting your fix, that connection. In terms of a sensory garden, just this interaction with that space is improving her disposition. But do take the time to sit and relax what's happening in the garden. And we do hope you'll promote what's going on. The intention of this garden, when it was devised, was certainly to support patients and staff and visitors to the hospital, but we're now seeing an influx of other visitors stopping by. We have prominent signage. The 2 main signs have a Healing Garden sign, which is great. There's arrows, many of you have seen this, green arrows directing folks. We have a new entrance that's augmented on the south side, more moon gates. So if you haven't been out there in a while, check out what's happening. And again, don't forget the volunteer opportunities that are coming up. And start them young. I've hit on this. many times over. This kid was a horrible weeder, but in a year or two, he'll probably be. Jenna, there's you. Jenna's in the room. Do you remember that little girl? So she was actually redoing what Jenna was planting. We had problems with, you'll learn one of these days, kid. This little girl's in college by now, I'm sure. So she wasn't planting, but she was helping take the plants out and share them with Jenna. I was hoping you'd be here today. I knew this was coming up. This is back. Yeah, have fun. That's all alternanthera, which is a tropical plant. But gardens bring smiles, your own gardens. And yes, they're frustrating. There's things that die. We have diseases. We have deer problems. But inherently, they're a great thing. And the thing for me here is the return on investment in having 3 acres up top, much of which is sponsored by donors in our foundation, but that it's an asset for the community and this facility going forward becomes important. There's a bird's eye view from the south looking in. Again, lots of cool stuff happening. We're at the point we're not going to do too many more new beds. We're right at the peak of, you should do this in your own home garden as well, incrementally. Don't go bonkers. Add space and then make sure you can maintain it, because we're right at the cusp. With that, I'll say thank you, and if you have to take off, please do. I'll stick around for questions, but I can take a couple right now if anyone has something pressing.